hide. Oh, not what I wanted to hide. Don't want to hide. Is. All right, and let's start off with a little bit of some code reading. So Noah, could you start us off? Did you do 20 through 24? Remember to go line by line.
Yeah, so line 20, declaring an object. So it's declaring the interface of an object with a three argument.
What is the interface called?
It's a person.
So on line 20, we're defining the interface person. That's it.
This person. With the three
Remember to go line by line, so don't read them all out together. So on line 21.
So line with I can like say with a three argument, the line 21.
Go line by line. So on line 21, the first name property will be of type string. On line 22, the last name. So you want to read them out one by one.
So line 20, declaring a person interface. And on line 21, the first argument of the interface.
It's not an argument.
Elements.
Property. The first name property, because we're defining the shape of an object.
Yeah, the line 21, the property with type string. And line 22 with the property last name with the type string. And line 23 with the property age type number.
Perfect. Thank you. Rukaya, could you do 26 through 32 and let me know if you would like any examples or demos along the way?
Okay. On line 26, the function is under 5 is being defined with one parameter number of type number, and it returns the type Boolean. On line 27, there's an if statement with the condition is number less than 5. On line 28, true is being returned. On line 29, there's an else statement. On line 30, false is being returned. And on line 31, we have the closing curly brace. And on line 32, we have the closing curly brace.
Awesome. Nailed it. Thank you. Caroline, could you do the next one? Could you do 34 through 40?
Yes. On line 34, the function is even is being defined with one parameter, which is a type number, returning a type Boolean with an opening curly brace. On line 35, the if expression, if condition
If statement.
If statement, the if statement, comparing the number, does the number have a remainder of 2, which is strictly equal to 0?
So I would say on line 35, there is an if statement with a conditional expression, number divided by 2, strictly equal to 0.
Thank you. Okay, on line 35, there's an if statement with a conditional expression, number divided by 2, with a remainder of 0. Opening curly brace. On line 36, there's a return statement with a true. On line 37, there is an else statement returning false. On line 39, closing curly brace. Line 40, closing curly brace.
Awesome. Thank you. Noah, you can do the next one. So 42 through 48, and let me know if you would like any examples.
Line 48, the function starts with J. Declaring the function start with J with 2 parameters.
Just one?
One parameter, string, and return Boolean.
And what is the type of our parameter?
With one parameter type string.
Yep.
And the return type Boolean. Line 43, if statement with the conditional expression. String strictly equal to character.
Yeah, so it's not string, it's string at 0.
String at 0, strictly equal J character, and returning a Boolean.
On what line?
Line 44. Line 45, the else the else,
Statement.
the else statement.
Mhm.
On line 46, return Boolean.
What Boolean?
Boolean, so I need to say
Yeah, so is it false, is it true?
return Boolean false, and line 47, closing bracket of the if else statement,
Mhm.
and line 48, the closing ending block of function start with J.
Awesome. Nice to know it. Thank you. Rukaya, could you do 50 to 56?
Let's break you off.
On line 50, the function is old enough to drive is being declared with one parameter person of type person. And it returns the value and it returns the Boolean type with an opening curly brace. On line 51, there's an if statement with the condition if the age property of the person object is less than or equal to 21. On line 52, true is being returned. On line 53, there's a closing curly brace followed by an else statement with an opening curly brace. On line 54, false is being returned. On line 55, there's a closing curly brace. On line 56, there's a closing curly brace.
Thank you. Caroline, can you do 58 through 64, please?
Okay. On line 58, the function is old enough to drive is being declared with one parameter person, which is a type person, returning a Boolean type with an opening curly brace. On line 59, there's an if statement with the expression if the age property of the person object is greater than or equal to 16, opening curly brace. On line 60, there is a return statement with a true return. On line 61, there's a closing curly brace, an else statement, and an opening curly brace. On line 62, there's the return statement with the false return value. On line 63, there's a closing curly brace, and line 64, a closing curly brace.
Awesome. Thank you, Caroline. Noah, could you do 66 through 72, please?
Yeah, the thing is, why in school they don't teach you how to read code?
I mean, it's not like you're gonna do this on your day to day. You know, if I'm gonna call with my boss, I'm not necessarily doing code reading my boss, but it helps you to get used to all the terms and the technical jargon. So by doing this code reading,
You
like
understand
immediately
it.
you know that if I do something like, oh, I don't want that autocomplete.
And you understand the code when you read it.
Yeah, it helps you for sure. But now, immediately when you see this line of code, I'm calling a method and I'm working with an object. And so like that's where code reading kind of comes into play, is it helps all those terms really sink into your vocabulary.
Yeah.
So that as soon as you get hired, you're already talking like a developer. Well, you already are a developer, but yeah.
Thank you guys.
But yeah, 66 through 72.
On the line 66, declaring a function is old enough to drink and drive. Oh, okay. With the one parameter, first with one parameter person type object.
It's not type object, it's type.
The type person object and return Boolean. Line 67, if statement with conditional expression, person.
Well, remember when we read objects, we'll start with the property.
The if statement and the if statement with conditional expression. The age property of person object is a greater or equal 16. Do you need the logical operator or
Just say and
person and age property of person object is a greater or equal 21.
Perfect.
On line 68, returning Boolean false. And line 69, ending the block of if statement and opening block of and else statement. Line 70, returning Boolean false. Line 71, ending block else block. Line 72 is ending the function block.
Awesome. Thank you. Rukaya?
So I want to know, is the condition is less than or equal to 16 and person.age less age property of the person object is less than or equal to 21, is it really needed? Or, I mean, because what I did was I just put in the age property with the person object in the bracket.
Just put in the age property with the person object in the brackets.
I didn't really put any condition because either way it was gonna.
You just said like if person.age?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, in theory, like with a function like this isn't necessarily an example of like something you'd ever actually write, you know, it's like, it's kind of weird to have a conditional statement where both my conditions return the same thing. It's just kind of a unique case with this one, just because, you know, you shouldn't drink and drive. So in theory, I would say like this isn't something you'd ever actually do. So there's no quote unquote like best practice or right way. If you just did person.age. In this case, since we're checking to see if they are old enough to drink and drive, that's why we did check for both. Are they greater than 16? Are they actually able to drive? Are they older than or equal to 21? Are they able to actually drink? But in theory, it doesn't really matter.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Awesome. Trey, good morning. Thank you for joining us. Can you please read line 74 through 76 and let me know if you have any examples? Oh, seems like he has dropped. All right, then we'll I think. Who read this one again? Was that Caroline? I forgot who.
Yeah, it's not gonna be.
Oh, was that you that read it? Did you read it last?
Yeah, I read this one. I read from line
You read this one?
66 to line 70.
Okay, so then it'd be Rukaya. So Rukaya, could you do 74 through 76?
On line 74, the categorize acidity function is being defined with one parameter pH of type number, and it returns the type string. We have an opening curly brace. On line 75, there's an if statement with the condition if pH is strictly equal to 7. On line 76, neutral is being returned. On line 77, there's a closing curly brace.
Awesome, thank you. Line 77, there's an else if statement with the conditional expression checking if pH is less than 7 and pH is greater than or equal to 0. Opening curly brace. Line 78, there's a return statement returning a string. 79, there's a closing curly brace followed by an else if statement with a conditional expression checking if pH is greater than 7 and pH is less than or equal to 14 with an opening curly brace. Line 80, the string is being returned. On line 81, closing curly brace with an else statement and then an opening curly brace. And then on line 82, a string is being returned. 83 and 84, closing curly braces. Caroline, can you please do 86 through 89 and let me know if you would like any demos or examples with the switch statement.
Yes, please, Sean. Can you please give me an example of the switch?
Yeah, so then the way that I would read line 87 is I would say on line 87, there is a switch statement evaluating the expression name. And then for line 88, I would say on line 88, there is a case clause for string Yaka. So when we see case, they're referred to as case clauses. We have a switch statement, and what is its condition evaluating?
Okay, dokie. On line 86, there is a function introduce Warner Bro being defined with one parameter name, which is a type of string, returning a string with an opening curly brace. On line 87, there's a switch statement evaluating a condition name and an opening curly brace. On line 88, there's a case clause with a string Yako, returning a string.
Awesome, thank you. Noah, could you do 90 through 93? Let me know if you'd like another example.
On line 90, the case clause with the string Waco. On line 91, returning a string, returning string. And case clause with the string dot. Line 93 is returning string.
Perfect. Line 94, default clause, and then on line 95, a string is being returned. followed by closing curly braces on 96 and 97. Trey, are you around?
Hopefully.
Hello, yes, good morning. Can I have you please read line 99 through 102? And then let me know if you would like an example on the switch and the case.
Okay, yeah, sorry, I just came in on tail end there. So
Yeah.
so we have a function being the recommend movie
Mhm.
function being declared with a switch.
So we're still, so what is our, how many parameters do we have?
Oh, I'm sorry, with one parameter genre, which is a value string.
And the
Of-
function, what does it
I'm
return? Sorry?
What were you saying? I'm sorry, Sean.
So we also want to call out the return type of the function.
Oh, okay, yeah, I'm sorry, which will return a string.
Perfect.
Then we have the opening curly braces, and on line 100, we have a switch. Or the
It was a switch statement.
switch statement of genre.
Yeah, with the expression genre.
Okay, I'm sorry, with the expression genre, then opening curly braces. And on line 101, you said it was a case clause with a
Correct.
string.
Yeah.
And on line 102, we have a return clause with a string.
Yeah, so the return wouldn't be a clause, only the case clauses would be.
Oh,
What
okay.
we're actually checking for. This would just be a return statement.
Okay, I'm sorry. Then it'll return a string.
Awesome. Perfect. Yep. Awesome. Thank you, Trey. Rukaya, could you do 103 through 106?
On line 103, we have the case clause with a string. On line 104, a string is being returned. On line 105, we have a case clause with a string. On line 106, a string is being returned.
Yeah. Caroline, could you do 107 through 110?
Okay, on line 107, there's a case clause with a string drama. On line 108, there's a return statement with a string. And on line 109, there's a case clause, the musical. On line 110, there's a return string value. Oh, I just got confused for a moment. Sorry, I'll ask later. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. And then Noah, finish this one off. 111 through 114.
On line 111, the case clause, string, sci-fi, and yeah, there's a block, right? Because I can see a line. This is separate block from each case, right?
Yes, each case is its own code block, essentially.
Okay, code block. Okay. On line 112, the return string interstellar. Line 113, default clause. And line 114 is a return string.
Awesome. That's it. Perfect. 115 and 116, closing curly braces. Let's take a look at some of our quiz questions. Trey, could you tell me, can you give me 6 examples of some comparison operators? You are muted if you were trying to talk. All right, well, we'll move on. We'll come back to Trey. So Rukaya, could you give me 6 examples of some comparison operators?
So we have the loose equality, the strict equality, less than, greater than, not equal to, and not strictly equal.
Not strictly equal, yep. So we have a whole bunch. We have less than or equal to, greater than or equal to, loosely equal, strictly equal, not equal. So we have quite a few, but those would be some examples. Awesome. Caroline, what data type do comparison expressions always evaluate to?
A Boolean.
A
True
Boolean.
or false.
Exactly. So anytime I ever use any sort of comparison operator, it is always going to evaluate to either true or false. Noah, what is the purpose of an if statement?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, it's like control the behavior of the code,
Mm-hmm.
like a decision how the code will be in this case,
Yeah, exactly. It gives us more control over our code so that I can have code run in certain conditions or certain times, and I can have other code run in other conditions or other times. So it gives us much more control over dictating when certain code should run or other certain code should run. Awesome. Trey, are you back? All right, then we will move on. Rukaya, is an else required in order to use an if statement?
No, it isn't. I mean, we can just use the if statement by itself.
Yeah, exactly. Else is not required. We can just do the if statement completely on its own. Sometimes you don't want to handle the opposite case. You only want to handle that one case. So you do not always need to include an else statement. Caroline, can you describe the syntax structure of an if statement?
Okay, there's the if statement keyword followed by two parentheses which hold the condition we are checking for. Then we have the opening curly brace, and in there we usually have a return of what the condition will be returning.
Yeah, so we have our if keyword, then we have a set of parentheses with some sort of a condition inside of that parentheses. Then we'll have our code block for our opening and closing curly brace. And sometimes we'll have a return statement, sometimes we won't. But then we'd have any code that would go in between those opening and closing brackets. Caroline, did you have a question?
I just wanted to note that yesterday it surprised me when I could use an if statement like before an if statement that actually held a conditional expression, I could have negated. That surprised me. I didn't realize that we can actually.
Yeah, you can have as many if statements as possible. We'll see it more in week 3. But if you remember when we talked about DOM event delegation last time, how I can have like an event listener on a parent and it would capture all events that happen on its children, or I can use like an if statement to make sure that I didn't click on a specific element. Otherwise, I kick them out of the function. So that way I've guaranteed that I clicked on like one specific element. So yeah, you can add as many if statements inside of a function as you want. There's no like limit, like I can only have 1, I can only have 2 or whatever. You could write 100 if you wanted to. Yeah, no.
Yeah, what the difference when you have if and then if else, and then you can see someone using if.
Yeah, we'll talk a little bit about that.
Okay.
Noah, what are the 3 logical operators?
Is it the and, or, and not?
Yeah, exactly. So we have and, or, and not. So I can use and to check for both conditions. I can use or to check for one or another one. And then we also have not to check for the opposite. Trey, are you back?
Yes. I'm so
Awesome.
sorry. I'm
Yeah,
good.
no worries. How can we compare 2 different expressions in the same condition?
Is this one for me?
Yes, please.
Okay. You use the comparison operators, and they're typically within an if statement.
Yeah, exactly. So we would use those, not necessarily the comparison operators, we would use the logical operators. So like and or. So in this case specifically, we would want to use and, so that way I compare this condition and this condition. But yes, we would use our logical operators to essentially evaluate multiple. Awesome. And then Rukaya, what is the purpose of a switch statement?
So the switch statement works exactly like an if-else statement, but it just makes like the switch statement makes our code more easier to read.
Yeah, exactly. So switch statements, just like an if-else statement, it helps whenever I have to handle various different cases. So I have multiple different conditions that I can check for. But just like how you noted, if you have a lot of conditions that you want to check for, it reaches the point where I think it becomes a little bit more readable to put it inside of a switch statement. In theory, they can both be handled in a similar way. It's just a matter of how many different conditions that you're checking for. If you're only checking for a few or 3 or whatnot, you can probably get away with an if else. But something like this where we have, our movies, this would be a good use case for a switch statement, because we have 6 to 8 different conditions we want to check for. So I think it just makes it a little bit more easier to read. And then Caroline is a default clause required in order to use a switch statement.
Okay, so no, it is optional. A default clause can technically be omitted, but it's a nice way to handle a final catch, all in case any previous clauses did not execute.
Exactly. Yeah. So a default clause is not required. It is completely optional. We don't need to have one, but it is very handy to use because we have, just like how Caroline mentioned, kind of like this catch-all in case none of our other case clauses ever actually matched or executed. We can have some sort of catch-all to still run some sort of code or do something even if none of the conditions match. Awesome. Caroline.
I had a quick question about these, like catching some sort of, I forgot what it's called, but we mentioned it before in different situations, like in functions and things, that we want to make sure that the code is built in a way so it is prepared for any type of like final catch, that, like, for example, here, like
Mhm.
it's good to use because we want to catch the final expression that didn't, for example, execute. So
Yeah.
is that a good way to think about it when we're coding?
Yeah, I mean, in general, I mean, there's gonna be times where you don't necessarily need to think about catching everything, like, every single conditional statement I have isn't necessarily always gonna have a catch. But you need to also think about like user experience. Like, I don't know if you've ever gone to a web page or a website or something, and then you did some sort of interaction, like you submitted something, but you never got any feedback, right? Like the page just sit there and it stayed the same. You never saw any loading wheels, you never saw anything happen, and you're like, okay, well, was this successful? Did this fail? So under the hood, some error probably happened, but what the developer never did is they never showed that error to the user. So you're sitting there wondering what's actually happening. Well, in the code, something went wrong. So where this default clause kind of comes into play is, I can catch some sort of an error. So maybe I had some sort of an input that allowed the user to type in some sort of a genre, and I would send them back, whatever movie it is based off of the genre. Well, if they gave me an incorrect genre, I can still send them some sort of text back to say, hey, you gave me an incorrect genre. Here's the genres that you need to do. So it's nice. You can kind of think about having, these catches so that in case something goes wrong, I have a way of handling and telling the user about it. But not every single conditional statement is going to have this kind of catch. It just kind of depends on the action that you're doing. Like if I'm trying to get data from an API and that request fails, I should have something that catches that error so that I can tell the user about it. But if I have a function that just capitalizes a string, it's not necessarily like an error that I need to tell the user about. It's just something that kind of went wrong.
Thank you.
I know we talked about if versus else ifs. I'll get to that in a second. Any other initial questions?
Yeah, I just wanna see what you did and like the start with a J. This one.
Starts with a J.
Oh yeah, sorry, I did the same thing.
Yeah, sweet.
So the string is an array, actually. It's like a
Yeah, strings are array-like, where you can access the characters individually with an index.
we can push and add to, like we can push.
You can't push to a string,
Okay.
but you can add to a string with the plus sign. So
Oh,
you,
so you
you can
cannot do-
concatenate.
Dot push or dot pop.
You can't do dot push or dot pop because it's not an array. It has indexes like in an array, but it's not an array. So I can't push to a string, but I can add to a string, so I can do string plus equals another string or whatever. And I can keep adding like that, but I cannot push.
You cannot do string dot size or dot length.
No, you can
Yeah.
see it's
Other
gonna say
languages?
push does not exist on TypeScript because push is only for arrays.
But in
Oh.
other languages, you can do that. You can do dot push, dot pop.
Not in
dot
JavaScript.
size.
Push is only for arrays. Any other initial questions? Okay, one thing I want to talk about is we said right here, what data type do comparison expressions evaluate to? They evaluate to a Boolean, right? So anytime I ever use any sort of comparison operator, less than, greater than, loosely equal, strictly equal, the result is always going to be a Boolean. Is 5 greater than 4? True. Is 3, greater than 1 or whatever? True. Et cetera, et cetera. It's always going to evaluate to true or false. So when we do something like this, if number is less than 5, return true, else return false. We don't really need to do this because every single time I use a comparison operator, like this less than, this is always going to evaluate to either true or false. So I don't need to explicitly return true or false. I can do something like this. Return number less than 5. Because this is always going to either evaluate to true or false. JavaScript is going to run this comparison first. It's going to check to see is number less than 5, true or false, and then it will immediately return the result of what that actually evaluates to. So doesn't really matter. You can still write your code like this if this makes more sense to you. Especially in these early stages, write code in the way that makes sense to you. You can always kind of refactor and adjust accordingly. But I will say that as you progress more and more through your career, that you will see people start to write their code more like that, rather than doing the return true and then the return false. But either way, there's technically still just accomplishing the same thing. But it is a little important thing to note that whenever we use a comparison operator, it will always evaluate to either true or false. All right. Any questions about that?
So this case on line 119, the return is gonna be, the compiler is gonna know, okay, if it's else, it's gonna be false, right?
Yeah, so and we can call it just to be, so let me open this up.
It's not just like one condition.
So is under 5 alt is this other one right here, return number less than 5. I'll give it 3. You can see it's giving me true because it's less than 5. I'll give it 5. You can see it's false.
So it's
already doing the comparison. So was 3 less than 5? It is. So then it evaluated to true. So then that's what got returned. Was 5 less than 5? This evaluates to false. So then this returned false.
Yeah.
Any other questions about that? Okay. Then another thing that we can talk about is the difference between if statements and doing multiple if statements versus doing a series of else if statements. So when do else if statements run?
If the first expression of the if statement does not return any value.
Yeah, so well, not that it doesn't return any value, if the first condition doesn't match, right? So if pH is strictly equal to 7, then it will run whatever code's inside of here. But this only ever gets checked. So this conditional only ever gets checked if this is false, right? That's what it literally means. Else if. If this is true, do this. Else if this was false. Else if this is true, then do this. So your else if statements only run if your if statement is false. Well, if we did something like this, and I did multiple if statements, I'm using a return statement, which we know return statements technically would exit out of a function. Well, let's say instead of a return statement, I was doing a console log. Okay. Not returning anything now. So now, the main difference here is that by breaking these up into multiple if statements now the code is always going to check each condition, regardless if one was already true. So now, watch, we'll talk a little bit more about this tool when we go over loops, but let me add this. And then I need to compile.
And the keyword debugger.
Yeah, we'll talk more about that in the loops exercise. Yeah. Okay, so categorize acidity, let's do 10. Okay. So we'll talk more about the debugger once we get into loops, and I'll give a whole overview over it. But for now, it just allows me to step through my code so I can see what happens line by line. So I called categorize acidity and I passed in 10. So now the first line is going to run. We're going to check to see is pH equal to 7. It is not. So then it moves on to the else if statement. Is pH less than 7 and pH is greater than or equal to 0? It's not. Then it moves on to the next one. In this case, it ran. So then it moves on. But I do the categorize acidity alt. Oh, did I not add a debugger to that one?
So every time it's really there.
I did. There we go. Whereas then with our, well, let me do it with our, okay, so let me change this back to actually console logs. Now let me refresh. Let me redo the first one. Okay, actually I want to do it so that way we see. Okay, so we're trying to talk about the difference between when I would do multiple if statements versus when I would do else if statement.
Okay.
So right here, I called categorize acidity. I passed in pH and I said it was equal to 7. I have a whole bunch of if and else if statements. So now my first conditional statement's going to run. It's going to check to see is pH equal to 7. It's true. So it's going to execute the code inside of it. And then you can see it immediately jump to the end of the function. It did not check this statement. It did not check this statement. And it did not check this statement because it already found the one that was true. Let's do the alt one. Why do you not do your debugger? There we go. Okay. So now, let me hit the first one. So I want to do a number that's less than 0. So let's do a greater than 14. So let's do 20. Okay, so now I called categorize acidity alt. I passed in pH is 20. Now my first statement is going to run. It's going to check is pH less than 0 or pH is greater than 14. Well, it is greater than 14 because it's 20, right? So now the code inside of my if statement is going to run. And now what's going to happen? It checks the next if statement.
Oh.
But I already found the condition that matched. I already checked for that. So now it's going to check the next one again. So that's the difference between if statements and else if statements. Whereas if you just had multiple if statements, it is always going to check each individual if statement. Whereas if I do if and then else ifs, my else ifs will only ever run if the previous conditional statement was false. So it kind of depends on what it is that you want. So in something like this, we could have gotten away with using multiple if statements because we would have used the return keyword to kick them out of the function. But that's why it would matter, is because then it would always check every single condition, which is not always what we want to do.
Is it because over there there's a return? So it's a break it.
That's why, yeah, exactly. That's why if I had written these with the multiple if statements with return statements instead of console logs, it would have been fine. Because then a return would have kicked me out of the function. But because I'm not returning and I'm just logging, then it's going to check each conditional, even though I already found the one that I cared about.
So when if else if we do console logs, we're gonna do the same behavior. The same
No,
thing?
it'd be different. It would only ever run one, which is what I showed right here. The first one.
Did you put console?
Let me refresh. Yep. So you can see I have these
Oh, yeah,
console
yeah.
logs, right? It'll run the first one. It'll run the code inside. Jumps to the end of the function. It doesn't even check these else if statements because I already found the condition that match.
Is it because the if else so one block and each if has its simple?
Well, it's literally just because of this else if keyword. Else, what does else mean?
And otherwise,
Otherwise, so if this is true, do this.
otherwise,
Otherwise, if this is true, do this.
otherwise.
Whereas then if I have just if statements, I'm not saying if do this, otherwise do this. I'm saying if do this, if do this, if do this. So they're always running. They're not only running under the previous one failing.
What are the use cases for each? Can we get like an example to use what we to use?
Do you have multiple conditions that depend on one or another? So like in this case, like our categorized acidity. If pH is 7, then I only want to do this. Else if, so I have multiple different conditions. But if there's something that I did want to check, so like if name equals Yako or name equals Wako, then we can return, or if name equals dot. So if we use return, it kicks them out of the function. So we can still do multiple if statements like so. But it just kind of depends. Do all of your conditional statements rely on the previous conditional statement? Or do you have like two different conditional statements? If I have multiple if statements in a function, they're usually checking for two different things. I don't usually check like a series of conditions with the same data with like multiple if statements. It's usually you would have else ifs because you have I want to do this, else if I want to do this, or else if I want to do that.
Probably, but we're gonna use it a lot when we have like a click listeners and stuff like that, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Um,
Any other questions about this? If versus else if, why I use ifs versus why I use else ifs? Rukaya?
It's not about this, but I just want to know that the curly braces aren't always needed. I mean, especially if there's only like a one line of code that we are executing.
Yeah, in theory, let me reset so we can see.
we don't have to use it if it's one line, right?
You don't have to use it when it's one line. Let me. Okay. So in theory, you could do it in one line like this. You need to make sure to remember your semicolons though, because those end your statements. So if you did stuff on one line and you forgot your semicolon, then you're gonna get yourself into trouble because then it's gonna treat these as like one statement together. So in theory, you could. I generally don't like to write things on one line unless it's something like really, really short like this, because I find it harder to read if everything's on one line, like at least me. I like seeing things as block like this because I like going line by line by line. But something like this, I think would get is fine. Eventually, you're gonna be learning about throwing errors. And so I would also do something like fetch call failed. And so then I would like have all this on like one line or something like that. But with like if statements, I generally never really do this. Even if I'm still returning something like super simple like that. Me personally, it's just how I like it. I like it like this, but that's just kind of where it gets into opinionated. But in theory, yes, you can write stuff on one line. Caroline.
Hello. So I was just wondering, Sean, about the switch and case.
Mhm.
So the switch, in those parentheses, we have genre, which is the condition, and the case, what is the case doing?
The case is checking what this is evaluating to. So it's essentially like I'm doing if
Oh, sorry, Sean.
genre equals action.
Oh, sorry. Can you show that again? I couldn't see the screen. I clicked something.
Oh
Accidentally.
yeah, so this genre right here. So this is gonna get evaluated, and these cases are checking to see what this evaluates to. So this is essentially like me saying if genre equals string action. If genre equals string comedy. It's essentially just checking to see what the value of this is.
Okay. Thank you.
Which is one thing I'll get into switch statements next in a second, but any other initial questions or other questions with regards to the ifs, else ifs? Rukaya?
So can you go to like one of your if-else statements, please?
Uh-huh. The else ifs or just if else?
If-else.
Okay.
Okay. So here, what I had done initially was I only had an if statement. I did not have an else statement.
Mm-hmm.
And I was getting an error because I had no return value in the sense so Boolean was basically throwing an error because
Yep.
nothing was getting returned,
Yep.
right?
Well, uh-huh.
Then what I did was I didn't put an else statement. I directly just returned the other value. So for example, if I wanted to return true in my if, then I just return false in the function.
Yep.
Did not have an else statement.
Yep.
So that worked. But I want to understand, yeah, like this.
Yep.
But I want to understand that since that was throwing an error, like my if statement was throwing an error, why wasn't the if else throwing the error? Because I mean, both the return values were still inside the code blocks, right?
So you're saying like this, why is the error on the
Yeah,
Boolean?
Does I have this one too?
No, I understand why there's an error here.
Uh-huh.
But what I don't understand is that if you add the else statement, why is
Uh-huh.
there an error?
Why? Return inside the else statement or no?
Yeah, see,
Well, of course, you're returning it, but it's still inside the code block, right?
Because I'm returning it, but still inside the code block. What do you mean?
Yeah. I mean, it should throw an error, right?
This else statement right here?
Yeah.
Because there's nothing inside?
No. So there is the return keyword with a Boolean,
Uh-huh.
right?
I like this, okay?
Yeah, anything works.
Uh-huh.
Now there's no error.
Yep.
Why is it like that?
Why is there no error on the Boolean itself?
Yeah.
Because now something is always being returned. So in this case right here, right? There's an
Oh,
that says,
got it.
yeah,
got it.
so function lacks ending return statement. So now it's saying, well, if this if statement evaluates to false, nothing's ever being returned. So if
Yeah, undefined.
yep,
We can do this. We can.
you could technically do this. No, yeah, exactly. So if this if statement were to evaluate, because I'm doing a return statement inside of here.
Oh,
Because my return statement's inside of here, it will kick me out of the function, which means that this would never even run. But, so this is why, like, in general, you actually don't even need to do a lot of else statements if you are doing a return inside of your if statement, because then you could just outside of your if statement, return whatever the opposite is. But yes, that's why you're getting that error, is because you needed a return somewhere that is outside of your if statement, in case your if statement never actually was true. All right, sweet. So let's talk about switch statements. So again, we can think about switch statements just like if else statements. It just helps or else if statements whenever we have like a series of conditions that we want to check for. But let's think about something like this. So we have the introduced Warner Brothers, which is going to be receiving a name, and we have two case clauses, right? But we can see, or we have three, but we can see that two of our case clauses are the same. They're both returning the same string. So switch cases have something called a follow through or a follow through. So let's say that I removed this return statement. Let me make sure I'm still compiling. There we go. So I removed the return statement next to Yako, and now I only have the return statement underneath Waka. Well, now let's go run our code. So I removed the code next to Yako. Well, let's call it with Yako. You can see I still got a string back. So I called introduce Warner Brothers with that string Yako, but there was no text underneath of that string Yako. So switch statements have something called a follow through, meaning as soon as it finds a case clause that it matches, it is going to keep executing code until it finds some sort of a return statement. So even though I had nothing next to this case clause, it went down here to line 89, and that's why it executed this. If I were to remove this line of code, now you can see that I'm getting I'm Q. So now it wasn't able to find anything to execute here, wasn't able to find anything to execute here, finally found something to execute here, so that's what I executed. So we could use that to our advantage. So in this case, since in our case, I had two different conditions that were returning the same thing, I could have also written my code like this. Usually if you were to do something like this, you would leave like a comment to say like, you know, follow through. So that way other people kind of know that that's what you're doing, because they may not necessarily know that that's like your original intention. But that's kind of one functionality thing that switch statements have, is that you can take advantage of that fall through if you do have multiple conditions that are going to be checking for the same thing, or are going to be returning the same thing. Caroline.
Yes, I was wondering, Sean, you mentioned that the case clause is strictly equal to Yako.
Yep.
What if it was not strictly equal?
What do you mean by so like if name wasn't a string?
No, like if the case clause. Well, maybe the question is, why is the case clause comparing it strictly? Like, could it compare it in a different way?
It's
Or
just checking what this is equal to. So it's gonna check what is switch. It's evaluating what this value is, which is name. So it's checking to see what its value actually is. So it's just kind of how switch is, like that's how they're built. Is whatever you put in the condition, you're just checking to see what the value of that condition is.
thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, wow, TypeScript is really like an old language for switch. Like using switch like C or C++. That's
Yeah, lots of languages have switch statements. Yep. Rukaya?
So logical operators don't work here because that is what I was initially trying to do.
They can, but then you change what you're checking for. If you use a logical operator, so like in this case, let's say I wanted to say
Yeah,
Yako or
yeah,
Wako.
they do work.
Well, it's not. It's when you do this, you're explicitly checking what name's value is. So now you're checking if name's value is quite literally this. So if you were to do something like this, you would have to say true
Always true.
name equals or name equals Wako. So now you're checking, does this evaluate to true? So does this condition evaluate to true? Then return that. So that's why we can't use the conditional operators. And this kind of Caroline, which is why whenever you put the variable inside of here, it's already checking to see what its value is, which is why in our case clauses, we literally are just checking for the different streams of what it could be. I'm not explicitly checking what it's equal to. If I were, well, then I would have to change my condition, because now I'm evaluating if this case clause is true, or if this case clause is true. I'm not checking to see what name's value is.
Awesome.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions about switch statements?
Yeah, but we're gonna learn about like sewing and the other, right? Like so
Later on, yep.
Oh, we're gonna learn this. Okay.
Mhm.
As my-
Anything else? All right, well then let me stop our share, let me stop our.